Hey, folks, Warren Wilson, Police One. I've got a special guest for you tonight to talk about the Lipsey's Smith & Wesson 642 Ultimate Carry and the 632. This is Brian Eastridge. So, Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself and revolvers.
Well, let's see. Where do we start? My first experience, actually my second experience with a handgun was with a Smith & Wesson Model 29. And I was about 3 years old. I still bear the scar from that one. My mom loves it when I tell that story, but I got hammer bit. Had to overcome a lot of recoil sensitivity over the years, but aside from that, I always had a real passion for revolvers. My dad was involved in a fatal shooting in 1979 with a Model 19-3 that's currently in my collection. That was, I mean, it saved him and his partner's life. So I always had a real fascination with revolvers. My granddad in about 1990 introduced me to 148 grain 38 wad cutters, and man, I couldn't get enough. And shooting a fixed sight Model 10-8, another one that's still in my collection. And when I got on the police department, I started shooting on the police pistol team, and we had a pretty solid pistol team. And I just kind of by default became like the traveling armor and service guy because I built 1911s. I was kind of already in the 1911 bandwagon, and it really wasn't that big of a leap to go into revolvers. It was just, kind of learning the quirks and things like that. So I shot PPC for a few years, but I was always working on revolvers in 1911s. 1911s kind of got boring, and I always loved the challenge of revolvers. They were just, sometimes there's anomalies with those things that there's not a formula or a mathematical equation that can solve. And the 1911's been, I mean, I like Joe Chambers and those guys. I mean, once you learn the math of those guns, it's really not hard to get them running and correctly. Whereas a revolver is a mix of like, engineering and voodoo science or something. So that's kind of where it all kicked off, and it's culminated in the last few years.
So a lot of people, when they think revolver, we think simple because they're simple to use and shoot, but they're not simple inside, are they?
Well, comparative to some of the striker fired guns, the simplicity comes from, an engineering mind of 100+ years ago. So they are simple in the way that they work, but they're not simple in the way that they're manufactured and things like that. So there's challenges there that your average guy that's got a Glock and is going to polish the cruciform or something, there's a lot of little antiquated quirks with revolvers that, yes, they are simple when you look at them, but the way the parts interface can be a bit of a complexity or a challenge.
So whenever I come across someone who can work on revolvers, I'm always kind of in awe, and I think it's magic of some kind, like voodoo, like you said, because it looks terribly complicated inside. I wouldn't even have a clue where to start, which is why we got guys like you.
Well, and I stand on the shoulders of a bunch of people that went to the old Smith & Wesson Armorers course. We had a range master named David Wilson. He'd been there like 10 times. So he had hand built over 50 guns. And one of our now departed range masters, Patricia Molinex, who, like, she would hold a revolver up to her ear and tell you, oh, it's out of time. It's got this, that, and the other. And you're like, wow, how did you do that? And as I started to like just be a range hanger on and soak up as much as I could, because I knew that like that armorer's course wasn't long for the masses, right? I came into law enforcement in 2002, and better than 30% of our fleet was were still carrying wheel guns. So they still had to maintain an armorer's force for that. And fast forward like 2012, most of those people were starting to go. The last class that issued revolvers was 1989. So 2002, you fast forward 12 years, 13 years. Well, now you go to 2012 at 20 years, most of those people are punching out on a pension. So, I spent a lot of time digging into guns that were, seized guns or guns that would come into our property room and they'd have some anomalous something, and being able to go and pick the brain of people that had to keep a fleet of those running for the better part of 30 years was it was pretty invaluable. And then that all kind of came together 2007 at the National Police Shooting Championship in Albuquerque. I got to spend 2.5 days with Jim Ray, or Jimmy Reyes, that was the head of Smith & Wesson Performance Center for about 20 years, right? He built some of Jerry's guns. He built the who's who of guns. And he was kind enough to loan me a lot of time in 2006 and 2007, where, guys are bringing their service gun up going, oh man, something's spitting lead. All right, Junior, grab your toolkit. Let's, so if Jim's still around, and I haven't heard from him in like almost 20 years, but man, gosh, like just to be able to, it's like sitting at the foot of the master, and getting to really learn those guns from a perspective of somebody that's handled like hundreds of thousands of them. So yeah, good times. Lipsey's is, as far as guns go, is like the largest wholesale distributor in the U.S., which would make them the largest wholesale distributor in the world. But they have the ability with their special projects division, which is essentially Jason Klossner, who's their senior vice president of special projects. And that guy's job is to sit around and dream up guns. I mean, like, well, and then there's more nuts and bolts to it. How do we get third-party vendors to supply parts? How do we get a company to come in and design something new for an existing gun? So he's behind the scenes is really keyed into how to make those pieces move on the chessboard. And he called Daryl Bulkey and I in kind of in the 11th hour, like October. You figure SHOT Show drops in January. And they had already pieced that gun together pretty well, about 95%, but they really wanted to get it right. And Daryl and I went to Baton Rouge just kind of on a phone call and like some hospitality. And one of the first things we said was, hey, these grips got to go. These suck. But with Daryl and I, we had like a pile of J-frame revolvers with us. So we were able to show, well, we want the features from this, and we want you to make this happen. And they were able to do it. So, and Jason, he kept saying, man, I see gun companies and distributors all the time. They make it to the 5-yard line and they fumble the ball. And we want to make this, we want a touchdown. We want to really hit it over the fence, home run. So that's kind of where Daryl and I came into the project, was pretty late into the development. But really, there were really minor changes, and the minor changes are what made that kind of, that was the touchdown, right? It was like getting it from the 5-yard line into the end zone. So, and they, to their credit, they were able to make those things happen really quickly. And I give all the credit to Andrew Gore from Smith & Wesson and Jason Klossner from Lipsey's, because they really made that happen. So,
and those are gun guys, and that's one thing that we haven't always had, and not talk about Smith & Wesson or anybody in particular. We haven't always had real enthusiasts involved in projects like this. So they bring you guys out, and one of the things that got changed, and this is a VZ grip, which we'll have in the comments below, but these are fantastic. These are absolutely, I didn't mind shooting a half box or a box. I don't mind it at all. It didn't bother me a bit. That's not normally the case with a 15, 16 ounce gun.
Right. And back in the day, they had, each one of the frames had a different stock. And then eventually they all went to what we call the Magna stock, right? Which is, it's got little horns up the side. So they went common on all the stocks. But we had examples of like custom stocks, one-offs, hand fitted this, some of the available, previously available boot stocks and things like that. And one of the benefits of like the 442, 642, going back all the way to the Model 40 and the Model 42, which are the predecessors, and they had a grip safety. They had, we call it the lemon squeezer grip safety, back in the 50s and into, like the mid 70s, is they're an enclosed system. So that hump on the backstrap encloses the hammer. So for Joe concealed carry, a policeman that carries it on an ankle or a pocket, it keeps all the debris. Yeah, right there. It keeps all the debris out of that gun. You go to the bodyguard, it has an exposed hammer on the top. So there's a slot that crap can get in. Right. So with the 42 and the 40, which became the 442 and the 642 years later, and the 640 and things like that, keeping an enclosed system is pretty smart for a gun you're going to carry every day. The problem is that hump on the back. With all the previously available stocks, they tend to accelerate that hump hitting the web of your hand. So when we got a hold of it, we were like, well, if you could make it really narrow and go all the way to the top of the hump, it'd still be concealable and, portable, but it wouldn't whack the out of your hand, pardon my language. But and previously, all the iterations in wood, you couldn't get that backstrap enclosure that thin. So, G10 has way more rigid properties, and they were able to really narrow that thing to keep it as small as possible, but also the benefit of you get a little longer trigger reach with a J, which is something previous boot grips, you're running your finger to the point you're hitting the web of your hand when that gun goes off. So it gave us a little more trigger reach, but it also took the sting out of the, the centennial frame is what that's referred to. And I used to call it getting, the centennial whack, because you'd get a pretty sharp whack in the web of your hand. So that eliminated it. And like you said, it makes it, with your standard pressure ammo and some of your lower recoiling ammo, it actually makes it really shootable. And I've subscribed to for years, the two-piece barrel system is a superior design, and it really squeezes all the accuracy that you can get out of those small guns. So,
yeah, I want to get qualified with it because I'm not going to send this back. I don't blame you. I'm going to buy it. It's just too good. I had a couple guys at the range. One of them was a firearms instructor, so he qualified with me with it. And then I let him shoot it. I had a young guy at the range, not a big guy at all. Really sharp, tough guy, but not a big guy. And I let him shoot this, and it was, normally when you have somebody shoot a J frame, you're kind of like, I don't really want you to shoot this. Why don't you shoot this Model 10 instead?
Right.
Because you don't want somebody they've never shot a revolver before. They don't understand these things can be difficult to shoot. In fact, every time somebody shows up, a brand new shooter shows up with a J frame, as much as I love them, the previous iterations, these are not beginner guns. These are expert guns, as Tom Givens always says. They're great. They're fantastic, but they're not for beginners. I would not have a beef with this. This kid, he took this gun and he was drilling at 15 yards in the center of the cleat target in the upper center ring. He's drilling it at 15 yards like it's nothing.
Yeah.
And that's, I've occasionally missed at 15 yards when I'm doing my backup course. I've occasionally missed the ring, And we didn't have, none of us had any trouble at all with this at all. It was just every one of them is right there in the middle. So it's a different animal, and the sights don't hurt either. Tell me about that.
So the sights, interestingly enough, Daryl was kind of behind the like almost real dark lime green. As hey man, that really pops even against like a white background or something like that. The previous iteration kind of had a chartreuse, almost like a fishing lure kind of translucent green. It wasn't bad, but Daryl was insistent, man, make that thing like ugly green, right? And what came out of that was, well, why are you so adamant about that? And he goes, nobody wears clothes that color, and green means go. And I went, ooh, man, he's so there was that piece of it. That rear sight existed kind of in a previous iteration with the 640 Pro. The problem was they didn't make any other adjustments to the 640 Pro to make sure that that gun hit with any kind of available ammo. Now there are, subsequent iterations that people have, built sights and things like that. So it's not a bad platform. It just, they didn't iron that out in the beginning. So a version of that sight kind of existed, but we were pretty insistent we want a U-notch, because right now U-notches are kind of the thing, right? They're good for fast and up close work, and you can also have some degree of precision with them. The other thing was the excess sight. They didn't change the height of that sight just for that gun. So the deck that thing sets on, Smith & Wesson actually went through the painstaking process of milling like 3/1000ths a pass off of that thing and then repinning it, restaking it to get a prototype that would actually shoot to the ammo that we suggested, which we suggested 135 gold dot as it's kind of a, nowadays it's kind of a standard for defensive ammo, right? It ebbs and flows in availability, but the beauty of doing that is that load is very closely tuned with the 130 grain military service load, or 130 ball. And you can't go into a sporting goods store and not find 130 grain ball. And because of the trajectory of that round, 135 gold dot just made sense, right? Practice ammo, 130 grain federal round nose, or Winchester, whatever, whoever makes that, 900 foot per second military or the mock-up of the old military service load. And then with that velocity, you take a 148 grain wad cutter, and it's real similar in POI. Most of us that are on the pension now, we carry wad cutters because we're not beholden to some agency's ammunition standard. And 148 grain, gold medal match or GA Arms super snub or any of that, they tend to hit really, really close to that 130 grain or 135 grain load. Whereas if you look back in police history, somewhere in the mid 90s, everybody decided we needed to carry 158 grain plus P jacketed hollow point for service loads in a 4-inch gun, which is fine. You're bumping 357 mag velocities out of a 4-inch. Well, all the sight heights previously had kind of been dialed to that ammo, which meant all of our other ammo shot like exceedingly low. So yeah, there was some curvature, like learning curve in that. But again, Smith didn't reinvent the sight. They reinvented the deck height that they put the sight on. So if you don't like that, lime green with tritium, you can go get the equivalent height front sight in another iteration, and it's a pinned front sight. Like, take it to your local home hobbyist gunsmith. They can figure it out. So that's kind of how the sights came about. The sight picture on those, on the 38s, that the green ball needs to kind of set low in the notch. But the other beauty of it is, if you do have to switch ammo, you can adjust your elevation in the sight window. like instead of paint touching the black on the bottom, maybe we hold it a little more centered. So it gives you the flexibility without having to completely recalibrate your gun. And it's a 140 width front sight with a 160 width rear notch. And that rear notch had never been offered before in that dimension. So it allows you a lot of leeway. And I'm a big fan of smaller front sight than rear sight so that I can continue to take information and feedback through the sights. So yeah, it worked out well. That was one of the things they really changed on the 11th hour. I was cautiously optimistic that they'd get it done by SHOT Show, and they had the prototypes like a month before SHOT Show. So I was
one thing I was concerned about when I heard it was,
Mhm.
is this I'm gonna have to go buy a laser for it because I can't see the sights on one of these anymore. I had surgery on my eyes; they were real
Yeah.
bad, and I got the real bad nearsightedness, and pretty much everybody I know has a little bit of that. I can actually shoot this and see the sights on it. Um, but
Yeah, and the other thing I was going to mention is the 32 H&R. I was kind of averse to it at first, and then when I started to see, you know, to me that's almost like 38 Super in a 1911. I can go from really hot, screaming fast light ammo to really heavy recoiling heavy ammo, and then I can find that balance in between. And it also, it allows you to shoot 32 Smith and Wesson long. And once I started to go, oh, okay, this is actually a good idea. I can tune the gun to me. Whereas with 38, even with lower pressure wad cutters, it's still got a pretty healthy bark to it. It's not unmanageable, especially with the new stocks, but the 32 really shined. And that was a Daryl and Jason thing. They were pretty adamant about it. And I was like, I don't know, man, the market, whatever, 38s are always going to sell. But, and then going to the sights, if you look back at previous iterations of guns, your 38 guns were very underserved because they had a narrow front sight that was the same color as the rear notch. So people would paint them or do all these things, but still it's a real narrow window. And if you go way further back to the 50s, they had a razor wire thin front sight. Well, you could see it in that rear notch. Well, they never adjusted the rear notch dimensions. They just made a fatter front sight. And then along comes the 340 M&P, and they did a U notch in the frame, and they did kind of a big dot. So the UC is kind of, it takes the best of all those things and puts it into one gun. So
yeah, and there's a lot of internet experts out there, but we've learned a lot about handgun efficiency and stopping power, or whatever you want to call it, incapacitation, whatever the cool kids are calling it on their particular gun form or whatever they're doing. And I think we've pretty much figured out that it kind of doesn't matter as much as we thought. Your caliber, your cartridge, whatever. 32, you'll notice guys like Daryl Bolke and Chuck Haggard and guys who've been around and seen a bunch of shootings, they got no beef with 32 because they know what it's capable of doing with the right ammo and in the right hands, more important than anything else. So I kind of regretted, like I was waiting for the drop, and I was on the email, and I was just going to fill in whatever the gun was and then hit send immediately, because the sooner you send it, the sooner they send you a gun. I kind of regret not getting the 32 at this point, and I'll probably end up having to add one.
yeah, and on the stuff with Chuck and Daryl, and in my 21-year career, like 13 of them were working the level 1 trauma center in Oklahoma. So, just as the beat officer for that area. And I really got, after about 2 years of looking at interviewing gunshot victims and seeing the ones that were fatal versus the ones that were able to give an interview bedside, right? It was like, man, I notice like the ones that I don't get to talk to are all kind of shot here and Everybody else, it didn't matter what caliber it was. And I mean, I saw the whole gamut from ball ammo to performance ammo. And I really became keen on, if you park it in the right place, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't. And Chuck and I talk a lot about how do you select ammo. And it's like, number one, it has to be just unbelievably reliable, right? It's got to go bang every time. Number two, it's got to be very accurate. And then number three is kind of like everything else, right? It's all I want it to be, just nauseatingly accurate or reliable. Then I need it to be accurate. And then after that, if it's got some performance good, then that's like the extra sprinkles on top, right? But man, cops in the 70s and the 60s did a lot of good work with ball ammo. Consequently, their training standards were really high on the marksmanship side.
This is a very more than acceptable platform for somebody to carry off duty. Now, granted, I'm going to keep carrying a 15 round 9mm. I've got M&Ps galore back here. I'm still going to do that. But on occasion, if I want to run down to the DG or whatever, that might just be the way to go. Throw that in the shorts or the sweatpants or whatever, and just run down to the store. And I think I'd be just fine. I think I'd feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, I've been retired almost a year now, and I carry a revolver every day, like every day. And it's kind of a mindset shift. The first like 3 or 4 months, I was still, toting around a standard capacity 9mm. And then I started to go, man, I don't have to worry about putting handcuffs on people. I don't have to fix other people's problems anymore.
Don't have to go looking for trouble.
No. And that gun, when I got I carried a 340 M&P. And then a lot of times, if I was on a security gig or something, I would carry the 43C, which is like the baby brother of the M&P 340 in 22 long rifle as an 8-shot. And I'd carry it on an ankle because it weighs nothing. It's a scandium with an alloy cylinder. It's like carrying a pellet gun on your ankle. And then I get to where it was like, okay, if I'm just going to the gas station or something, it's kind of nice to be able to have my hand on a revolver while I'm doing that. And I don't need to worry about shooting across a parking lot anymore or through auto glass or any of that stuff. It's more like you mind your business, I'll mind mine. and
So
if you get in mine, it might be
that's a perfect segue. So where does this fall into law enforcement nowadays?
I carried a backup gun the bulk of my career, with a few exceptions based on assignment. My last assignment was bicycle patrol, so my last 3 or 4 years, it was like, I'm hugging babies and passing out stickers. I'm really not dealing with the criminal element head on. But that gun as a backup gun, and I tell people, I got made fun of in my career for carrying a backup gun. People are like, I don't know why you do that. Do you not trust your semi-auto pistol? And then having known a couple of cops that got their semi-auto pistol taken from them, all of a sudden that becomes a real priority. I think it's one of those ones that if you listen to the guys that were in the revolver era, they all carried backup guns. I mean, almost 100% of them carried backup guns, even the guys that weren't gun guys, because they only had 6. It's faster to reload with 5 on a new gun than it is with 6, right? So with that being known, it was like, man, why do you not carry a backup gun? And then I would see guys get in an incident where they got their gun attacked, in an entanglement, and they'd be at the gun range with a 642 or a 442 going, hey, I probably need to do this too. So for me, as an ankle gun, it fits the bill. As an off gun side pocket carry gun, it fits the bill. And now that people are moving their gear off of their belts onto like vest carriers, man, a pocket gun makes sense. When I was there, having a radio right over your pocket or whatever, it was kind of a challenge. But but that to me is where it really shines. And we had a friend of ours that, we trained up in Terre Haute, Indiana, and like 3 weeks later, he ended up, bad guy got his gun, fired around, and he ended the fight with a 642 out of his off gun side pocket. And, that to me, it was like, man, I wish I could show that to every recruit in the US. Like,
And then
your second,
multiple cases of that exact thing happening. And, your duty gun, no matter how good it is going to break at some point.
it can.
It's a matter of how many times you shoot that gun. Now, these guys might go out and shoot, a box or two a year when they have to. And I've seen guns break right out of the bucket. Of the first magazine, we've seen quality guns break. It can happen.
And
So
with semi-auto with semi-auto pistols that are recoil dependent and they are environmentally dependent to operate, how many times do we see these 100% reliable guns choke in a gunfight?
Yep.
We've got that video now with the advent of body cameras that we see malfunctions at a way higher rate than we do in, administrative qualifications, things like that. So I get it. Fix your semi-auto. But, if you're in the thick of it, how hard is it to reach into a pocket and at least get a gun in the fight quick? To where, if there's a lull, okay, now I can tap rack and do all the things to make this other gun work. But man, especially since the wide use of body cameras, I've seen some incidents where I'm like, dude, that guy should be dumping his primary and getting a backup gun right now. And, the grace of God and clean livings, these guys have prevailed, but there's hundreds of examples of backup guns saving people's life. And I just don't think there's a reason not to carry one. I can think of a few exceptions, but man, my dad used to say all the time when I'd be getting ready for work, I'd be like, I'm going to strap my ankle gun on. He's like, yeah, better to have it and not need it.
Yep. If you guys don't know, Gary Eastridge is also a career cop and he's a firearms instructor, isn't he, as well?
Yeah.
Okay. And he's been around for a while. I thought you guys were brothers because he's taking such good care of himself. I was like, man, that guy looks good. But he's a good guy too, and really, really knowledgeable, and kind of thankful that he brought you along because I get to talk to you and ask you gun questions here and there, especially revolver stuff. So it's fun.
It was a cruel plan that he raised a kid that would learn some gunsmithing. Because then he didn't have to learn it. He could just say, hey, come to the shop and fix this,
That's kind of what I was thinking. He's that kind of guy.
Yeah, the joke was on me, apparently.
The bad thing is you probably had some of those guns in your safe that he used to have in his safe. So that's probably a give and take there.
Yeah, I do. And, every time I teach a revolver class, I always take his Model 19. And it's just a stock Model 19. He did the 70s cop thing. He whittled on the stocks and made them pretty and made them fit his hand really good. And I lead it off with, how many of you can tell me where your lineage with guns started? Oh, well, my dad is a nylon 66. Like, my dad was in a fatal gunfight with this. And this is the reason I'm standing in front of you. Because if I had never known him, if something bad had happened, or maybe his partner had gotten killed and he decided, I'm just going to put that away, I probably never would have been so intrigued by, like the martial arts of firearms. And when I graduated the academy, I'm going to spoil this for everybody. You get to hear this in my class. When I graduated the academy, he tapped the butt of my Glock 22 and he's like, hey, and I still get a little emotional when I talk about this. He goes, hey man, I need you to master that. And I'm like, yeah, dude, I shoot IDPA and I do this and that. And he's like, no, you need to master it. I'm like, okay. And he goes, because if you master it, your chance of using it is going to drop dramatically. And if you do have to use it, then you and I get to go have dinner that night. And I'm like, ooh, that still hits me in the feels, man. But the point of that being, He always carried, as long as I was around him, he always had a J frame in his pocket or tucked in his waistband, no holster, and it was, I have that gun now, and it was a Model 36 that he chopped the hammer on, um, and that left a big impression on me that he was always armed all the time. Even if it wasn't an optimal gun, he was always armed, and the bulk of that was with a wheel gun. So, and now we've brought out this UC gun that really has all the, like, a lot of the capabilities of like a K frame or an L frame or one of the bigger guns. It has all the shootability, and it has all the features we always wanted to make them, portable and shootable and, accurate and all this. So when I got the 442 UC, the first one that was made, Gary Eastridge got that one. I was like, here you go.
I tell you what, I'm going to put you on the spot because we didn't talk about this before at all.
Yeah.
But taking, a 442, 642, somebody brings Brian that gun and says, hey, make me one of these. How much would that cost, you think?
Well, on the previous iterations, you can't pull the barrel. I mean, well, you can, but
you wouldn't be able to do that, would you? Yeah, because you got the 2-piece barrel.
Yeah,
let's just say somewhere around these features. You're right. You absolutely cannot make that the same, but just somewhere around that, like the trigger, the sights, the stocks, the beveling.
Trigger job, is going to run you $50 to $100. A rear sight on the previous iterations, you can do one. It may or may not hit to the sights, but that is an intense operation that, requires a vertical end mill. And then, you can, if you saw the picture of the Finks gun that Daryl has, that's a 2-inch barrel gun, and you look at how tall the front sight is on that gun, and it had a DNL, rear sight. So you're talking after that, and then refinish the gun because you're going to whittle on it, right? You're talking at least $1,200.
Yep.
I mean, that's at the inch. That's like if a guy like me does it, that doesn't really do that, right?
And that's about what Finks charges. I've got one in there, and it's a brilliant job that they do. Yeah. It's about $1,300 to take.
That's before you buy the gun.
That's before you buy the gun. So then this is where I'm going with this is, wow, this is $769 MSRP. We know the street price is going to be 100, 150 less than that.
So, now we have that. We have a mashup gun. Is essentially it took the best of all the previous generations, put them into one thing and made soup out of it. It's like, oh yeah. And every gun before, all of us, you, me, everybody would go, man, if I only had this, if I only had that, if this, they do that on that gun. If I would have had that on this gun, it would have made it better. But they really hit it out of the park. And again, like you said, we know Jason. He didn't want to get it to the end of the project and fumble something. So, and consequently, the input that Daryl and I gave drove the final product a lot more than I thought it would. And that's not to sound contrite or that I was like a skeptic, but those stocks were, and there was, even after we did the input, Jason still went in and put the time in on them to make sure that they were just right. Even down to the aesthetics of the gun, that was the weird thing with me, is I was like, oh man, hey, leave the black hardware on the stainless gun. That just, it pops. And then that actually pivoted the color of the stocks. Like, ooh, well, now we're going to have 2 different colors of stocks. So those 2 guns are just standouts. And I really enjoyed it. I was really happy that it came out as good as it did. And then being able to be part of the launch at SHOT Show, which I will tell you, I would not have volunteered to go do that and volunteered our time if we didn't believe in it.
Well, Brian, it has been a ball. I always appreciate doing podcasts with you, and thanks for coming out and helping me with this article. I don't think people understand how much went into this, and I hope that helps them understand exactly what kind of project this was and the kind of folks that are involved in it. And so, just to close, what else would you like to say? I know you do some stuff on the side. You're an old retired guy now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Daryl Balkan Ice Projects is the American Fighting Revolver, and we're at AmericanFightingRevolver.com. And we have a video library and print article like resource that's just, anything you want to know about revolvers. It's all going in there. And we're trying to preserve that away from the social media gods so that we can get a little more in depth and do a little more show and tell and things like that. So we do that. And then we do, we're part of the Pat Rogers Memorial Revolver Roundup. We're working on an East Coast Revolver Roundup right now. I got a conference call on that tomorrow, but that'll be in South Carolina the first weekend in August. You heard it first.
Break
It's going to
that.
be a snubby revolver roundup. We're going to try to, get people to break their snubs out and come train for 2 days. It'll be like the original revolver roundup. And then let's see, we do some open enrollment training classes. We're doing media events with some other companies, some other manufacturers and things like that. So it's a lot of fun, keeps a retired guy busy. And then I still own EDC Belt Company. The manufacturing is domestically outsourced now. So there is a company in the US that's building that belt. And then our friends over at concealedcarry.com are pretty much the point of sale for that belt. So, it's good stuff, man.
Yeah.
What else?
If you have any interest in wheel guns at all, AFR, American Fighting Revolver, is a cool source. I've burned up a lot of time over there checking out some of the videos and learning how to chamfer and that kind of cool stuff that I thought was just magic. And Brian kind of told me how to do that on his videos. So a lot of cool stuff over there. Again, Brian, I appreciate you so much coming on and holler at me about this. I'm really excited about the project, and I'm gonna hint. I hope there's more to it. I'm gonna watch your body language and see if you tell me anything.
Stay tuned. That's all I can say.
I knew you were gonna do that. All right, brother. I appreciate you so much.
Yeah, anytime, Warren. Talk soon.